The phrase born again does not belong to Jesus. It belongs to the man who misunderstood him. John 3, verse 3. The Greek word Jesus actually used carries two meanings, and English kept the wrong one. Why does the same word show up at the crucifixion, stitched into the garment they stripped off his body? And why did John use a completely different Greek word for wind 3 chapters later if wind is really what he meant here? 3 Greek words, 3 double meanings, one passage that no English Bible has ever fully translated. We are walking through every one of them, verse by verse, and at the end, one practice built from a phrase Nicodemus heard but could not act on. Under 5 minutes. Passage shaped, nothing imported. Here's where it starts. John 3, verse 1. There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. John does not introduce him casually. He stacks 2 credentials. Pharisee means he knows Torah. Ruler of the Jews means he sits on the Sanhedrin, the 71-member council that governed Jewish religious and civil life. This is not a curious outsider. This is a man at the top of the system. Verse 2, he came to Jesus by night. In John, night is never just a time, it is a condition. John 1, verse 5, the light shines in the darkness. John 13, verse 30, Judas goes out and it was night. Darkness in this gospel signals a state of not yet seeing. Nicodemus arrives in that state. He is sincere. He addresses Jesus as rabbi. He acknowledges the signs. He is not hostile, but he is about to hear something his own language cannot hold still. Verse 3, Jesus answers him with one sentence. Unless one is born Anothen, he cannot see the kingdom of God. That word, Anothen, Strong's G509. It appears 13 times across the New Testament. It can mean from above. It can mean again. It can mean from the beginning. 3 possible meanings in one word. And in this verse, nearly every major English Bible chose again. Most viewers have heard this verse 100 times. In sermons, in altar calls, in tracts handed out at bus stops. Born again. It sounds like a restart, a redo, a second chance at the same process. But the Greek did not say that, or at least it did not only say that. Verse 4 is the proof. Nicodemus responds immediately. How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? Listen to what he does. He hears again. He pictures repetition. He imagines biology. He asks a biological question about reentering the womb. His response is the receipt. It tells you exactly which half of the word he grabbed. He took the surface meaning, and 2,000 years of English translation made the same choice Nicodemus did. You know this experience. You repeat a phrase so many times that it stops being a meaning and starts being a sound. Born again. You say it, you nod, you file it under things you already understand. And the Greek was holding a second meaning the entire time, behind the one you were handed. But Anothen is not the only word in verse 3 carrying 2 meanings. The verb, Gennaō, is doing something the English word born does not do, and it changes who this verse is actually about. Open your English Bible to John 3, verse 3, and read the phrase, born again. When you hear born, you picture arrival, something happening to you. You are the subject. You are the center of the event. A birth is something you experience passively. That is what the English gives you. But the Greek word is Gennaō, Strong's G1080, and Gennaō does not center on the one arriving. It centers on the one generating. Gennaō means to beget, to generate, to produce from a source. In classical Greek, it is the father's verb, the act of the one who initiates life, not the one who receives it. John had another word available, tikto, Strong's G5088. Tikto appears 18 times in the New Testament. It centers on the mother's experience, the act of bringing forth, the labor, the delivery. John did not use tikto, he used Gennaō. The father generates. The child is the result, not the actor. That distinction rearranges the entire verse. Born again puts you at the center. Something must happen to you. You must decide harder, believe harder, walk the aisle one more time. The weight lands on your effort. But begotten from above puts God at the center. The source does the generating. You do not produce origin, you receive it. Verse 6 makes this explicit. Flesh generates flesh, spirit generates spirit. The word Gennaō appears twice in the same verse, once for each source. John is not making a metaphor, he is making a structural claim. What you are made of depends entirely on what generated you. And John proves this is not an isolated idea. Turn back to chapter 1, verse 13. Those who believed were begotten, not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Same verb, same author, same thesis, 3 negatives stacked in a row. Not your bloodline, not your desire, not someone else's decision for you. Then 1 positive, of God. The generating source is identified, and it is not you. You know this. The difference between assembling an identity out of effort, resume, and performance, and recognizing something running in you that you did not install. One is manufactured. The other was already generating before you noticed it. You did not produce it. You did not earn it. It was running before you found words for it. Gennaō describes that second thing. The source was always active. You just had not turned around to see where the current was coming from. In this reading, the shift from born to begotten corresponds to the shift from self-produced identity to received origin. The passage is not describing a second attempt at the same process. It is describing a different source altogether. This is correspondence, not medical claim. Map, not prescription. We are decoding a text, not prescribing a treatment. So the verb says begotten, not born, and the adverb says from above, not again. But there is still one more word in this passage doing exactly the same thing, carrying 2 meanings at once. And John left proof that he did it on purpose. John 3, verse 5. Jesus continues, "Unless one is begotten of water and pneuma, he cannot enter the kingdom of God." The Greek word is pneuma, Strong's G4151. Your translation says spirit. And here in verse 5, spirit works. The verse is describing a spiritual begetting, water and spirit as the conditions for entrance. But hold it, because pneuma is about to do something no English translation can follow. Verse 8, the pneuma blows where it wills, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who has been begotten of the pneuma. Read that slowly. The verse starts with pneuma, meaning wind. It blows. You hear its sound. Blowing and sound belong to wind. That is atmospheric language. But the verse ends with pneuma, meaning spirit. Everyone begotten of the pneuma. That is spiritual language. Same word, same verse. 2 meanings, operating simultaneously. The verb in the first half, ne, means blows. It comes from the same Greek root as pneuma. The word family locks the wind, meaning into the front of the sentence. And then the back of the sentence pivots to spirit without switching words. John built a verse that holds both meanings in the same breath. But maybe that was accidental. Maybe pneuma just happened to work both ways and John did not plan it. There is one receipt that eliminates that possibility. John 6, verse 18. The disciples are on the sea, a strong wind is blowing, but the word John uses for wind is not pneuma, it is anemos, Strong's G417. Anemos appears 31 times in the New Testament. Nearly every time, it refers to physical wind. It is the default Greek word for wind in the natural world. John knew anemos, he used it. When he wanted to describe literal wind, he reached for anemos and it worked fine. But in chapter 3, verse 8, he did not use anemos, he used pneuma. That swap is the proof. John had a perfectly good word for wind and chose not to use it in the one verse where wind appears in the Nicodemus dialogue. He picked pneuma because he wanted both registers active in the same sentence, wind and spirit, at the same time, not a comparison between 2 separate things, a single word doing double duty. You know this experience. Something moves through your inner life that you did not summon. It was not on your schedule. You did not pray it into existence. You cannot tell anyone where it started. You cannot point to the moment it arrived. But you felt it, you heard it, and then it moved on, and explaining it to someone else was impossible. Verse 8 describes exactly that. You hear its sound. You do not know where it comes from or where it goes. The pneuma is not something you control. It is not something you schedule or manufacture in a worship service. It is something you register, and the passage says that is what being begotten from above feels like, an arrival you cannot source. Now step back and see the full pattern. Anothen carries 2 meanings. Gennaō carries 2 meanings. Pneuma carries 2 meanings. 3 words in one passage, all doing the same thing. In every case, the English Bible kept the surface meaning and the Greek held a deeper one underneath. But we have only looked at Anothen in John 3. It appears 3 more times in this gospel. And when you see where, the entire passage cracks open. Everything so far has been inside John 3. Now we leave the room, because the word Anothen does not stay in the Nicodemus dialogue. John plants it 4 more times across his gospel, and each time the meaning is not again. Your translation of verse 3 says born again. You have heard it that way your whole life. The word sounds settled, but watch what John does with the same word when there is no Nicodemus in the room to mishear it. John 3 verse 31. Still the same chapter, 28 verses after the Nicodemus exchange. John writes, "He who comes Anothen is above all," and every English translation, every single one, renders it from above, not again, not anew, from above. The one who comes from above is above all. Nobody disputes this. Same word, same chapter, same author, different translation. Because without Nicodemus in the scene to force the misunderstanding, the word defaults to its primary meaning. John 19, verse 11. The crucifixion narrative. Jesus stands before Pilate. "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given you Anothen." Every translation says from above, authority descending from a higher source. No translator alive renders this as given to you again. The meaning is directional, from above, that is to outside the Nicodemus dialogue, both unmistakably from above. Now the third, John 19, verse 23. The soldiers take his garments after the crucifixion. They divide his outer clothes into 4 parts, but the inner tunic is seamless, woven Anothen throughout. From the top to the bottom, one continuous piece. Stop. The same word that opened the Nicodemus conversation in chapter 3 is in the garment stripped from Jesus at the cross in chapter 19. Same word, same author, 16 chapters apart. And the garment is described as woven from above, running all the way down without interruption. Undivided, one piece, starting from the top. Now lay out the count. John uses Anothen 5 times. John 3 verse 3, John 3 verse 7, John 3 verse 31, John 19 verse 11, John 19 verse 23. The 3 uses outside the Nicodemus exchange all mean from above. Every translation on the shelf agrees. Only in verses 3 and 7, inside the dialogue with the man who demonstrably misunderstood the word, did translators choose again. And across the entire New Testament, Anothen appears 13 times. 8 of those 13 mean from above. Only one clear instance, Galatians 4 verse 9, means again. Paul pairs it with palin, the standard Greek word for again, as though Anothen alone could not carry that meaning without help. This is the floor shifting. Born again means to repeat, start over. Have a conversion moment and try the same process a second time. Born from above means to receive from a source you did not construct. Not repetition. Origin. Not do it over. Recognize where it came from. You have felt this. That moment when a phrase you have carried your whole life suddenly becomes transparent, and you see that it was never describing what you assumed it was describing. Not because someone deceived you, not because there was a conspiracy, but because one Greek word carried 2 meanings, and the language you inherited only had room for one of them. And the half you received was the half that belonged to the man who got it wrong. In this reading, from above corresponds to a direction, not outward repetition, but an inner descent from a source higher than biography or effort. The garment woven Anothen runs from the crown to the hem without interruption. The passage maps origin as something continuous and undivided, received, not produced. This is correspondence, not medical claim. Map, not prescription. We are decoding a text, not prescribing a treatment. 3 double meanings. 5 uses of one word. A thread running from a night conversation to a garment at the cross. But there is one question left, and it is about Nicodemus himself, because John does not leave him in chapter 3. Remember how Nicodemus arrived? By night, in darkness. John marked it the moment he introduced the man. And John is a writer who does not waste a single detail. Nicodemus heard Anothen and caught the wrong half. He imagined re-entering a womb. He walked away from chapter 3 still in the dark. But John does not close his story there. He gives him 2 more appearances, and if you track the 3 scenes in order, something moves. John 7, verses 50 through 52. The chief priests want to arrest Jesus. The Pharisees are unified against him, and Nicodemus speaks. Does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does? Notice what he does. He does not say Jesus is the one who comes from above. He does not confess anything. He makes a procedural argument, a point of legal order. It is cautious. It is careful. It is the minimum possible intervention by a man who is not yet ready to stand fully in the open. The Pharisees sneer back. Are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee. He disappears again, back into the dark. Then John 19, verse 39. After the crucifixion, after the garment woven Anothen has been stripped away, after the trial where authority given Anothen was named out loud. Now Nicodemus comes again, and this time it is not by night. He arrives with Joseph of Arimathea. He brings a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds, an extravagant amount, a public amount. You do not carry 75 pounds of burial spice through Jerusalem in secret. And then John does something precise. He identifies Nicodemus, but not just by name. He writes, Nicodemus also, who had first come to Jesus by night. The darkness tag from chapter 3 is recalled. 16 chapters later, John reaches back and pulls forward the word night. He wants you to remember where this man started, and he wants you to see where he stands now. Not hiding, not at night, carrying weight, in the open, at the cross. This is where the three threads converge. Gennaō asked, who does the generating? The answer was not you. Pneuma showed that the inner movement arrives without a return address. You hear its sound, but cannot source it. And Anothen, tracked from chapter 3 to chapter 19, proved that the direction was never backward. It was always from above. Nicodemus is the viewer. He came from church. He came at night. He heard the familiar phrase and grabbed the surface meaning. He missed the deeper register. And the passage does not condemn him for it. It shows him moving, slowly, over 16 chapters, from night to open daylight, from a womb question to burial weight carried in public. You know this feeling, the slow recognition that you have been living inside the surface reading of something. Not because you were lied to, not because the people who taught you were evil, but because you heard one half of a word and built an entire identity from it. And the passage is not angry at you for that. It gives Nicodemus 16 chapters to move. That is patience, not condemnation. Scholars call it the Johannine misunderstanding pattern. Jesus speaks a word with two layers. The character grabs the surface layer. The reader is offered the deeper one. He does it with living water in chapter 4. The woman says, "You do not even have a bucket." He does it with "destroy this temple" in chapter 2. The crowd says this took 46 years to build. He does it with "my food" in chapter 4. The disciples say, "Who brought him lunch?" Every time, the character hears the surface floor. The reader is offered the upper one. And born again is the most famous example of the pattern. The phrase became an identity, a movement, a political marker, a bumper sticker, a magazine cover, all built on the half of the word that belonged to the man standing in the dark. The question the passage leaves you with is not whether you have been born again. The question is whether you have only heard half. Here is one practice. It is built from Pneuma and the phrase in John 3 verse 8. You hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. First, sit still for 2 minutes. No music, no prayer format, no guided anything. Just listen to whatever is present in the room. Breath, sound, ambient noise, whatever arrives. Second, notice the impulse to name every sound, to source it and label it and file it. Car outside, furnace clicking, clock ticking. That is the cataloging reflex. Let it pass. Stay with the hearing itself, not the naming. Third, when the 2 minutes end, reread John 3 verse 8 once, just once, and notice whether it reads differently now. Not as a metaphor comparing the spirit to wind, but as a description of something you just experienced. You heard sounds, you did not choose them, you could not tell them where to come from or where to go. The practice mirrors the verse. Pneuma arrives without your permission. You register it by its effect. The practice asks you to sit inside that experience for 2 minutes and notice that the most real movements in your inner life did not come stamped with a return address. And one more. This one is built from Anothen in John 3 verse 3. Name one identity you have built, a role, a title, a version of yourself that you generated from your own biography, your own effort, your own performance. Then ask one question. Did I generate this or did I receive it? Sit with the question for 60 seconds. Do not answer it. The passage does not resolve it for Nicodemus either, not in chapter 3. He gets 16 chapters to move from night to daylight, You can take 60 seconds. Gennaō asked who is doing the generating. This practice asks the same question the verb asked. 3 words, 3 double meanings, 1 passage that 2,000 years of translation compressed into half its depth. The phrase born again is not wrong, it is incomplete. The Greek held 2 meanings. Your Bible kept one, the other half is still in the text. It always was.